Hey, what's up guys, Vlad here. So let's check out one of the better B660 boards by Biostar. This is their B660 GTA racing board. Looking for affordable Windows or Office keys? Look no further, I got you covered. Head over to scdkey.com, pick your Windows edition, use my discount code LE25 to get a 25% on any Windows or Office products. Once you complete your order, after a few seconds you will receive your code. In Windows, go to Settings, there should be an Activate Windows prompt at the bottom, click that, enter your code and wait for Windows to finish activation. To check the activation status, use the command prompt with the command slmgr.vbs/xpr and you should receive a notification that the machine is permanently activated. Once again, use code LE25 at scdkey.com. What you will be getting in the box, besides the motherboard of course, are just a manual and a CD, which you don't have anywhere to insert to. So there's that, and of course you get the 4 SATA cables. Of course, here is the board itself with, of course, a racing inspired look. Lots of blue and silver in the mix here. In terms of what the board has, let's start with the usual. Immediately you can notice massive heatsinks around the VRM area, and that's of course with a reason here, because this board has a 17-phase power design. So putting a beefy CPU here like 12900K or 13900K, it will handle it without any issue. So yeah, of course, with the latest BIOS update, this board supports both 12th and 13th gen Intel CPUs. In terms of physical connectors and slots, it has of course the LGA 1700 CPU socket, DDR4 RAM support, 4 DIMM slots next to the CPU socket with support of up to 5000 MHz in speed and up to 128 GB in capacity. Right below the CPU socket we have the first NVMe slot. This one is in the direct connection with the CPU and it's Gen 4 3x4 2280 size. But literally next to it on the left is another NVMe lookalike slot. This is technically a slot for Wi-Fi card because we do get Wi-Fi antenna cables as you can see, but the choice for the card is left for the user to decide and purchase separately. Below the NVMe slot is the first PCIe slot. This is the Gen 5x16 slot. Immediately below it, covered with heatsink, is another NVMe slot, Gen 4 support of course, and below it to the left is a PCIe by 1 slot which is limited to Gen 3x4 speeds. Below that one we have another PCIe slot, X16 size, but this one is Gen 4x4 mode, and also important, this one will be disabled if you use the second M.2 slot. Totally fine with that as it's close to the GPU and sometimes GPU will cover this slot anyway. Below that one we have another M.2 NVMe slot covered with a heatsink. This one is Gen 3x4 only, and if you are using the SATA SSD here, SATA port 8 will be disabled, not if you use the NVMe drive of course. And below this M.2 slot we have another PCIe by 4 slot. This is Gen 3x4 support. In terms of internal connectors and ports, starting from the bottom from the left to the right, HD audio front header connector. The board has ALC 1227.1 audio channel codec, which is a very good audio codec. We have 2 PWM fan headers, 1 Thunderbolt header, 1 COM port header, 2 USB 2.0 headers, front panel header, speaker header, and next to it we have 1 TPM header and BIOS reset jumper pins. On the right side, from the bottom to the top, we have 8 SATA ports, USB 3.2 Gen 1 front header, USB Type-C 3.2 Gen 2 front header, 24-pin power connector, and 2 5V ARGB connectors, followed with another 2 12V RGB headers. On the top of the board, right to left, CPU optional PWM fan header and of course CPU PWM fan header. And we have 8+4 EPS power connectors. The I/O shield is filled with ports and the shield itself is connected to the board, so you can't forget to install it. So here we have DisplayPort 1.4, HDMI 2.0 and even DVI, which is almost extinct. 2 antenna ports, 1 PS.5 port for keyboard and mice, 2 USB 2.0 ports, 5 USB 3.2 Gen ports, 1 Type-C 20GB port, and of course the LAN port, and this board uses the Realtek 8125B 2.5 gigabit network controller, and of course here are the analog ports for the ALC 1220 audio codec. So we don't have BIOS reset nor the BIOS flashback buttons here, and there is no SPDIF digital out as well. The BIOS is of course filled with plenty of options. You have the option to set memory XMP profiles. I have 4 sticks of DDR4 3600 MHz installed here. XMP profile was immediately recognized and was working without any issues. You can of course set fan curves for each PWM fan header separately, and each of them supports DC mode as well, which is important for water pumps, as many of those, including this Lee & Galahad 360 AO I used here, still use DC mode. There is even an option to control LED here in the BIOS as well for all the RGB headers and for the board itself, as it has light zones on the IO shield and on the South Bridge heatsink, that mirror finish light with racing logo. Anyhow, BIOS has more than enough options, so you can set anything you want in them. In terms of software that comes with it, it has the VVD-DJ for setting the RGB lights, it has the Biostar Racing app, which you can use to set fan curves from Windows itself, and so on. It's hard to do a review of the board, but I can of course show you the performance I got with it. So NVMe will go up to promised speeds of the drive itself within Gen 4 specs of course. I did install one Gen 4 and one Gen 3 drive here, both of them were hitting their speeds within their specs. While gaming, the VRM was holding pretty fine, considering I installed i9-12900K here, which requires a lot of power. So technically this is one of the better B660 boards that does not fall in the budget category, but rather in that sweet spot mid-tier. This immediately puts it in that $230 category as well. The temperatures of the CPU while Cinebench R23 stress testing were up to 85 degrees with a power draw of 250 watts, which is within Intel specs, and of course VRMs were hitting 59 degrees, which is excellent since it's a only 17-phase VRM. But there are some things that this board has more than it needs and lacks in other areas. For example, we have 8 SATA ports, that's literally 2 more than needed, if not 4 more than needed, but we only get 4 PWM fan headers. Storage support is above standard, especially for up to 8 SATA connectors. It also supports RAID in 0, 1, 5 and 10 configs, but count on the fact that one SATA connector shares a line with a third M.2 connector. Another strange thing, at least for me, is the inclusion of the DVI port, and then we are missing the SPDIF and 2 more analog ports for the audio. Finally, the VRM, which is actually quite good. It's a 17-phase design with a current capacity per phase of 70 amps. It's built on the Renesas RAA228-228 PWM drivers and on semi FDM F5062 voltage regulators. The power delivery is therefore quite robust. Speaking of, here is another strange thing. One of the VRM heatsinks has fin strip design, which is good, but Biostar decided to block its airflow by adding another bigger heatsink around it. So somehow this is super strange. I mean, it's working good, but the design choice is rather strange for something like this. So in conclusion, this board will offer you more things than some other boards, but as mentioned, it will fall short with some basic things like more PWM fan headers. The price category is more or less the same with the competition. Having more SATA ports might mean a great deal to some of you. Having no SPDIF might, on the other hand, be disappointing to some of you. Regarding the VRM section, if you plan on using a beefy CPU like i9-12900K or 13900K, I would recommend that you look for Z690 or Z790 boards, as B660 is not intended for them anyway. I just wanted to stress test it and see how will it handle under pressure. So this leaves it being best suited for Intel mid-tier CPUs like i5 or i7 variants. No matter which one, as the VRM will handle those without any problems. Just don't go with i9 and you will be good. Thanks for watching guys, check my other videos as well, sub to the channel, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.